Hi, my name's Eleanor, and I wasn't supposed to survive. At 19, I woke up in a hospital bed, paralyzed from the waist down. My parents told everyone I had died that night. They even held a funeral. But years later, when they dragged me into a police station and claimed they'd found me wandering the streets, the officer typed in my name and froze. He turned to them and asked, "How is she alive?" They had a plan, and I was never meant to walk or speak again. But what they didn't expect was that I'd start remembering everything. So now I need to ask you something. Have you ever been erased by your own family and lived to tell about it? Let's start there. The whistle of the kettle was the only sound upstairs. It had that hollow, echoing quality that made the house feel bigger than it was, like it was calling out for someone who never came. I was already awake. I usually was. When you sleep just a few feet from the furnace room and the dryer clicks on every hour, rest becomes more of a suggestion than a fact. I stared at the ceiling. There used to be footsteps up there, my own, dancing around in socks too thin for Ohio winters. Now, only the tick of the thermostat and the occasional creak of my mother's shoes passed overhead. My room, once the storage space, still smelled faintly like mothballs and wet cardboard. They cleared it out after the accident, threw down a rug, wedged a hospital bed between two bookshelves, and called it home. Footsteps again, not light, not hurried. My mother. I heard her open the cabinet, pull out the cheap floral teacup set, and pour hot water from the kettle like she did every morning. Then, down the stairs, 1, 2, 3, too many. She appeared in the doorway, perfectly pressed blouse, makeup already done. "I brought your tea, sweetheart," she said, like she was visiting someone else's child at a nursing home. She placed the cup on the table beside me, just a little too far. I stared at it, then at her. "Thanks," I said softly, not moving. She didn't notice, or she did, and chose not to. She smoothed her skirt and headed back up the stairs before I could ask for help. By the time I got to the cup, awkwardly dragging myself forward in the chair, straining to keep balance, the tea was lukewarm. The clinking of silverware started not long after. Breakfast. I wheeled myself to the ramp they installed after the insurance check that never came. They said the builder was a friend of the family, but even a stranger wouldn't have placed the railing this high. At the top, I caught my breath, adjusted my sleeves, and rolled into the kitchen. My mother was setting the table. 3 plates, no fourth, not even a napkin for me. "Oh, good, you made it," she chirped, not looking up. "Colin's stopping by after church. He has updates about the house." My brother, the favorite, the one who went to law school out west, married some woman with perfect hair, and came back twice a year to pretend we were all still worth his time. Dad sat at the head of the table, flipping through the paper like a man waiting for his own life to start. "Morning, Elle," he muttered. "Morning," I replied, parking my chair in a spot that didn't block the fridge. Breakfast was eggs, toast, and that awful low-sodium bacon Mom pretended to like. "I had the most wonderful conversation with Pastor Greg," she said, scooping eggs onto my plate without asking. "He said people admire our strength, the Wynn family's strength." I chewed slowly. My teeth felt dull. "You should really smile more at church, darling," she added. "People already pity us. No need to make it worse." I didn't answer. I was too busy pretending my eggs didn't taste like nothing. Then I saw it, just behind the sugar bowl, peeking out from a pile of mail. A white envelope marked life insurance claim, closed. My breath caught. That money. It was supposed to cover the costs, the chair, the surgeries I never had, the therapy I never finished. We were told the check got lost, delayed. I stared. Mom followed my gaze. Her hand reached out, calm, smooth, practiced, and slid the envelope away. "Colin's wife is pregnant. she said quickly. Can you believe it? A little win on the way. I smiled like I was supposed to, like nothing had just cracked open in front of me. I'm happy for them, I said. That afternoon, I wheeled myself past the hallway. I hadn't noticed it until then. The photo frames had been changed. There was one from 2 summers ago. Mom, Dad, Colin, his wife, their dog. All smiling. I was missing. In the frame where my high school graduation photo used to hang, there was now a picture of their Labrador in a birthday hat. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. That evening, I stayed downstairs. No dinner, just silence, and the sound of Colin laughing in the living room above. Later, I heard them, my parents, in the kitchen. She's lucky we didn't report her dead, Mom hissed, voice low but sharp. It would have been easier. A pause. My father said nothing. She's still here, she added, but she doesn't even try to act grateful. A crash. I realized too late my hand had been shaking. The teacup I was holding had slipped, shattered on the tile floor. I didn't move. I just stared at it. Pieces everywhere. Like me. I cleaned it up slowly, careful not to cut myself. They didn't come down. No one asked. That night, I sat in the dark, hands folded in my lap, knees shaking. I thought about that envelope, about the photo, about the words they said when they thought I couldn't hear. And then, into the stillness of the room, I whispered, I'm still here. The words hadn't even settled in the air before I heard footsteps on the stairs. My mother's, careful and deliberate. She knocked lightly on the doorframe without waiting for a response. I thought it might be nice to get out for a bit, she said, voice chipper, too chipper. A little drive. Fresh air will do us good. Us. Like this was something we'd both benefit from. She had that look, smiling too hard, eyes too bright. Before I could answer, she was already inside the room, smoothing my hair, tugging the sleeves of my sweater down like she used to do when I was 8 and about to meet someone important. You don't need to fuss, I said, trying to pull away. Nonsense, she replied. You always look so tired in the mornings. Let me just... Her fingers tightened the scarf around my neck. Not enough to choke, but enough to feel owned. Outside, the sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that made the streets look flat and endless. Dad was already waiting in the car, engine running. He didn't look at me when I was wheeled out. He didn't say anything at all. The car ride started in silence. Mom hummed softly. Amazing Grace of all things. My head leaned against the cold window glass. That song had played at too many funerals in our town. Grace never really showed up afterward. I watched familiar houses blur past. Mailboxes I used to recognize, front yards where I once rode my bike. But soon the roads changed. We veered off the usual route. I noticed, but I didn't say anything right away. I knew better than to ask too early. I waited. Then, where are we going? My mother didn't miss a beat. Just somewhere safe, honey. Somewhere quiet. I looked at my father. Still nothing. Just that tight jaw, that far-off stare like he'd swallowed something that wouldn't go down. I tried again. Is this a doctor's appointment? Mom's hands stayed on the wheel. Her smile didn't move. Don't worry about it. You'll feel better soon. The car slowed. When I saw the building, my stomach twisted. The police station, no mistake. The flag out front, the sign that said City of Shaker Heights, Public Safety, and the squad car parked out front. I froze. Why are we here? My voice was too high, too thin. Mom didn't answer. She was already getting out. She walked straight toward the entrance, her heels clicking on the concrete like she had a meeting to get to. Dad finally turned around. His eyes met mine for a second, then dropped. He opened the door, reached for my chair in the trunk, and helped me out. Still no words. His hands trembled. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the front desk empty, except for one officer typing something. Margaret walked up, cleared her throat, and spoke with the same tone she used to order appetizers at a restaurant. "Hello, we found this woman wandering alone. She doesn't seem to have family, possibly confused." I couldn't breathe. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat tightened, my hands gripped the armrests. The officer turned to me. "Ma'am, what's your name?" My voice cracked. "Eleanor, Ray." He started typing. His fingers paused on the keyboard. He leaned in, then turned the monitor toward my parents. "You said you found her?" Margaret nodded once. "Yes, poor thing." The screen lit up. My name, my date of birth, and below it, deceased, cause of death, automobile accident, 2012. Margaret's smile vanished. Dad backed into a chair like his knees gave out. I stayed perfectly still. I wasn't surprised. I should have been. But deep down, I think I always knew something was wrong. How the bills never made sense, how the insurance never came through for me, how Margaret always avoided details when doctors asked about my care. The officer stood slowly. "Excuse me, I need to get my supervisor." My mother lunged forward. "Wait, it's not what it looks like. She's been unwell. She says strange things. She's confused." "No," I said. My voice cut through the air, sharper than I'd expected. "I'm not confused. You are." She turned to me, blinking fast, mouth twitching between a scowl and a plea. "Eleanor, don't be dramatic." "You declared me dead," I said, louder now. "You cashed the check. You left me in a basement while you smiled at church and told people how brave you were." The officer reappeared with another man in uniform. "We'll need to take a statement. Ma'am, please step this way." Mom hesitated. Dad looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, mostly to herself. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because there was nothing left to cry out. "Guess I really was invisible, huh?" I said. Even death was more convenient than dealing with me. They wheeled me into a side room. The air was too cold, the lights too bright, but I was steady. For once I wasn't pretending. The officer handed me a clipboard. "We'll be opening an investigation," he said gently. "But first, we need your side of the story." I signed my name with hands that didn't shake. Through the glass, I could see Margaret and Harold sitting on a bench, their faces pale, hollow. "You buried me once, but I'm still breathing, and that's your biggest mistake." The ride back from the station was dead quiet. Not a word from either of them. I sat in the back seat staring out at the trees, bare branches trembling under a weak wind. Each turn brought us closer to the house I'd once called home, but tonight it felt more like a crime scene. When we pulled into the driveway, Margaret stepped out first, heels clicking on the concrete again, like nothing had happened. "Dinner's on the table," she said flatly, not even glancing back. The house hadn't changed, but I had. The front door creaked the same way it always had. The hallway still smelled like lavender cleaner and stale coffee. But it all felt off, like I was walking into a set someone had forgotten to strike after filming. Dad went straight to the kitchen, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and disappeared into the living room. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't even ask if I wanted tea. Maybe he thought he'd already said too much by saying nothing. I sat at the edge of the dining table. The light above flickered slightly, buzzing like it knew something I didn't. My plate was already served, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, but it felt like a bribe, not a meal. Margaret sat across from me, eating as if nothing was wrong. She didn't look at me, didn't ask about the police, didn't ask what I'd told them. Her calmness was calculated. I didn't touch my food. The radio on the counter crackled, stuck between stations. A hiss of static broke the silence. Margaret reached over and shut it off. "That noise drives me crazy," she muttered. I almost said it then. It's not the noise. It's the reminder you can't fix what's broken, But I held my tongue. For now. After dinner, I wheeled myself down the narrow hallway, past the family photos. One after another. Colin's graduation, Margaret's garden party, Dad holding a puppy. But none of me. Not a single frame. My face had been erased, replaced, forgotten. I stared at the blank stretch of wall where my high school portrait used to hang. Gone. I waited until the house had gone quiet. Margaret upstairs pretending to read, Dad asleep in front of the TV, before I rolled down the ramp into the basement. The smell hit first. Dust, old wood, something sour like forgotten paper. My art room. Years ago, I'd painted in that space. Before the accident, before the lies. Now it was just storage, boxes everywhere. Labeled in her handwriting, winter coats. Old curtains. Christmas stuff. One box sat farther back, partly hidden beneath a shelf. Faded marker read, insurance records. I opened it slowly. Inside were documents, pages with my name, date of birth, details from the accident, death certificate copies, forged signatures, bank statements. I flipped through them one by one, each sheet a nail in a coffin they'd built for me while I was still breathing. At the bottom, I found a photo. Margaret, standing at a podium, holding a framed picture of me, my senior yearbook photo. A banner behind her read, Hope and Healing Fundraiser, A Mother's Faith After Loss. The caption on the back was written in neat cursive. Margaret Wynne, honored as a woman of strength after her tragic loss. I didn't cry. I just sat there, holding that photograph like it belonged to someone else. I think some part of me had always wondered if I was being dramatic, if I'd made up the distance, the coldness. But this was proof. I wasn't a daughter. I was a story they sold. I didn't hear her come down the stairs. "You shouldn't be here," Margaret said behind me. I didn't move. She stepped closer. Her voice didn't shake. "You were supposed to die, Eleanor. We made peace with that. You can't come back and destroy what we built." What they built. She reached for the light switch. I still didn't turn. The basement door creaked, and then it shut. The light clicked off. Dark. I sat in the silence, my hands still on the edges of the box, fingers pressed into the corners, like I could absorb the truth through skin alone. They didn't just bury me for money. They buried me because I didn't fit their version of a perfect life. They called it faith, but it was vanity. Back upstairs, the house was still quiet. I didn't want to wake anyone. I moved slowly, rolling into my room like a ghost in my own story. On my nightstand, I placed the photo of Margaret at the fundraiser face down. Then I opened the top drawer and took out a spiral notebook. Nothing fancy, just pages. But now it would be something more. A record, a timeline. My own kind of insurance. Real, not forged. I wrote down everything I'd seen. The accounts, the documents, what she said to me. I tucked the notebook beneath my mattress. They weren't going to get away with this again. Not this time. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I would document, gather, and wait. They feared exposure more than they ever feared losing me. As I turned off the lamp, I noticed the faint streaks on the wooden floor beneath my wheels. Dust trails. Ghosts leave no trace. But I will. I didn't sleep long. My mind had finally grown quiet, but the world didn't return the favor. Just after dawn, I was jolted awake by the sound of tires screeching across wet pavement, sharp and sudden, like something tearing loose. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. But then I heard the creak of the front door, the heavy footsteps on wet gravel, and my father's low voice grumbling something I couldn't quite catch. I pulled the blanket tighter over my lap and wheeled closer to the window. Outside, in the thin, cold drizzle, Harold stood by the van with his hands in his coat pockets. He was staring at something beneath the front bumper. The van sat lower than usual, tilted slightly like a wounded animal. I watched his lips move, Then he shook his head. "Damn vandals," he muttered, barely loud enough for me to hear. I got dressed quickly, pulling on my sweater and scarf, then wheeled out onto the porch. The morning was damp, heavy with the kind of rain that never falls hard but soaks everything just the same. The kind that makes you feel like the sky is breathing down your neck. I rolled down the ramp toward the van. "What happened?" I asked. Harold flinched. He hadn't noticed me behind him. "Someone must have messed with the van last night," he said. "Brake fluids all over the driveway." He didn't meet my eyes. I looked down. There was a long, slick trail of dark liquid creeping toward the street. It reeked of chemical bite. The realization hit me like a cold slap. That was the transport van, the one used for my therapy rides. The only vehicle with a lift. Harold rubbed the back of his neck, trying to act puzzled. Kids these days. Pranksters. The front door creaked again, and Margaret stepped outside, arms folded tight under her cardigan. "Maybe," she said, "it's a sign that you should stop going out so much, Ellie. You know, for your safety." My stomach clenched. I glanced between them, my heart thudding slow and heavy. The truth was written all over their faces, etched in the tightness of their mouths, the studied blankness in their eyes. It wasn't vandals. It was them. I didn't reply. I turned and rolled back up the ramp, careful not to let the wheels slip on the wet wood. My fingers gripped the rims tighter than necessary. Back inside, the kitchen clock ticked too loud, as if it were counting down something I hadn't been told about. The day dragged. No one spoke much. I stayed in my room, jotting notes in my truth map, sketching timelines, drawing circles around names and questions I'd never had the courage to ask before. By late afternoon, the drizzle had turned to fog. That's when the doorbell rang. Margaret answered it with her usual politician's smile already plastered on. I stayed in the hallway, just far enough to see but not be seen. Officer Lee stood on the doorstep, rain speckled on his shoulders. "Just following up on the report," he said gently. "Wanted to check in on Eleanor." Margaret's smile didn't flicker. "Of course. Come in. Would you like some tea? I made lemon chamomile." "Appreciate it," he said, stepping in. When he caught sight of me, he nodded. "Can we speak privately?" I asked. Margaret's mouth opened, but he cut her off. "Just for a moment." She hesitated, only for a breath, but then turned on her heel and disappeared into the kitchen. We went to the den. I shut the door behind us. He sat across from me, his notebook already out. "There's something off," I whispered. "They're erasing me. My name, my records. You said something was wrong in the database?" He nodded slowly. "It's strange. Your file's been flagged in multiple systems. Medical history, DMV, even social services. It's like someone deleted you years ago." I swallowed hard. "That's not a mistake. That's on purpose." He didn't say it out loud, but I saw the agreement in his eyes. "I'm going to keep digging," he said. "You hang in there." Margaret walked in at that exact moment, holding a steaming mug. "Officer Lee," she said sweetly. "So brave of you to keep checking in. It must be painful, dealing with a case involving a deceased girl." His hand paused halfway to the tea. He glanced at me, then looked back at her. "You're a brave woman too, Mrs. Wynne. Losing a daughter, that must have been devastating." The room dropped into silence. Her smile cracked, just slightly, before she turned and walked out. Later that evening, after dinner no one really ate, I wheeled myself toward the garage. Something kept tugging at me. A memory maybe, or instinct. The air smelled of gasoline and mold. I pushed the door open and flipped on the light. There, in the far corner, under an old tarp, were my original wheelchair tires. The ones from right after the accident. They'd been sliced clean through, torn down to the wire. Beside them, half buried under newspapers, was a photograph. I recognized the image immediately. Me, in college, standing at the edge of a pier in a blue dress, smiling like I still believed everything had a place in the world. The edges were singed. I turned it over. In my mother's handwriting, foreclosure. My throat went dry. This wasn't about money anymore. It never was, not really. This was about disappearance, about shame, about hiding what made her uncomfortable. I sat there, in the stillness of that cold garage, the silence pressing in around me. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened my notebook. Page 2. Under the date, I wrote, "Closure, removal." Back in my room, the storm finally broke open. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Thunder rolled in the distance. Somewhere, the old kitchen radio crackled back to life. A ghost of a melody, just a few notes, danced through the static before fading again. I didn't shut it off this time. I let it play. Then I picked up my pen and wrote the next line in my truth map. If they wanted me gone once, they'll try again. But this time, I'll be watching. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes, listening to the storm echo beyond the walls. The sound of rain against the glass was steady, soft but constant, like someone whispering outside. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. Then, through the rhythm of the rain, came a sound that didn't belong. 3 slow taps. I froze. My hand reached for the lamp switch, but I hesitated. The power flickered once, then steadied. The window, half shrouded by curtains, reflected the dim light from my room. A shape moved just beyond it, tall, broad-shouldered, soaked through. The tapping came again, quieter this time, almost apologetic. When I pulled the curtain aside, a man stood there under the porch overhang. Water dripped from his hair. For a moment, my mind scrambled to match the face to the years that had passed. Then it clicked. "Jake?" I whispered. He nodded once, eyes darting toward the door. I hesitated, then unlatched the window. It creaked open, letting in a gust of cold, wet air. He climbed in carefully, boots leaving puddles on the floorboards. The room smelled of rain and gasoline. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said softly, wiping his hands on his jacket. "Your mom's been asking around. About you." I frowned. "Asking what?" "Strange questions," he said. "She came by the shop last week. Wanted to know if your old car was still registered. Asked if the VIN number was traceable." My breath caught. The room tilted slightly. "What would she even need that for?" He shook his head. "Said it was for paperwork, but Ellie..." She asked if I remembered anything from the repairs, before the crash. I stared at him, my pulse climbing. "And do you?" His jaw tightened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, weathered folder. "I've kept this for years," he said. "Didn't know what to do with it, but after I saw your name again, I figured it was time." Inside were a few sheets of old invoices, handwritten notes, and a mechanic's checklist. My car, the one I'd been driving the night of the accident. My finger stopped on one line, brake system adjustment, requested by M. Wynn. My throat went dry. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize back then. She told me it was for routine maintenance. But when I saw how new the pads were, I thought it was odd. I went along with it." The air between us thickened. I heard the rain again, louder now, pressing against the house. "So it wasn't an accident," I said. Not a question. Just truth, finally finding air. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I looked down at my hands. They didn't shake this time. They just tightened around the folder until the paper edges bit into my skin. "All these years," I murmured. "I blamed the rain, the road, me." I looked up. But it was her. Jake looked away, guilt flickering across his face. "That's why I left town," he said quietly. "She came to see me after the crash. Said you were better off dead. That you'd never walk again, and that the truth would destroy what was left of your family." My stomach twisted. Then why come back now? I asked. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed, water-stained. Because I saw this, he handed it to me. It was a death notice. My name, same date, updated. Survived by loving parents, Margaret and Harold Wynne. Someone's been keeping it active, he said, refreshing the record every few years. I stared at the print until the words blurred. My pulse beat in my throat. They're still pretending I'm dead. Jake exhaled. That's why I came. You're not safe here. The words hung heavy between us. For the first time since the accident, something inside me shifted. Not pain, not fear, but something sharper. Purpose. I'm done hiding, I said. He nodded slowly. Then let's find proof. Real proof. You've got one side of the story. Let's finish it. He took a small burner phone from his pocket and set it on the table. If anything happens, call me, not the police. I hesitated, staring at it. Trust wasn't something I gave freely anymore, but his eyes, tired, remorseful, held something honest. Okay, I said finally. He managed a faint smile. You always did say, okay, like it meant war. I laughed once, short and bitter. Maybe it does now. The lamp flickered again. For a split second, the radio on the nightstand came to life. Through the static, a single lyric escaped. Soft, ghostly. You can't bury what's still breathing. Jake looked toward it, startled. I just stared. We'll see, I said quietly. He nodded and moved back toward the window. Be careful, he murmured. They'll know I came. Rain swept across his face as he climbed out, disappearing into the dark yard. I sat there alone again, clutching the folder. Proof that my mother's love had teeth. The thunder outside rolled long and low, the same sound that followed me into the crash years ago. I didn't flinch. This time I was awake for it. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind against the siding, I heard it all. I sat up most of the night, watching shadows stretch and bend across the walls. By the time morning light broke through the blinds, my thoughts were already miles ahead. The scent of coffee drifted under the door, warm and sweet, dragging me back to a version of childhood that never really belonged to me. I wheeled myself toward the kitchen slowly, every sound louder than it should have been. The clink of silverware, the soft hum of the radio turned low. When I entered, Margaret was standing by the stove, flipping pancakes like it was any other Saturday morning. The sunlight poured through the lace curtains, casting patterns on the floor that felt too delicate for a house built on lies. Good morning, Ellen, she said brightly. I stopped cold. She hadn't used that name in over a decade. Not since I was a child. Not since that name was etched onto a forged certificate in a folder labeled deceased. Coffee's fresh, she added, placing a plate on the table with mechanical precision. You look pale, dear. Rough night? I forced a smile. Just thinking. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, folding her hands. Her eyes flicked across my face like she was scanning for damage. You ever think about moving somewhere quieter? A nice facility? They have lovely gardens. Companionship. I stirred my tea slowly. You mean a place out of sight. Margaret smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. Don't twist my words, Ellen. There it was again, that name. A surgical cut dressed as motherly concern. I leaned in slightly. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Easier to visit a grave than a living daughter. Her face tightened. The fork in her hand paused mid-air. Don't start, she warned, but I wasn't starting. I was continuing. Finally. This was the moment the rules changed, I thought. I wasn't begging for space anymore. I was taking it. I held her gaze, quiet and steady, letting the silence fill the space between us like smoke. She cleared her throat. You always were dramatic. You think you know so much now? Because of what? Some old boyfriend crawling through your window? She tried to smirk, but her voice trembled just enough to expose the crack beneath. Before I could answer, a knock sounded at the front door. Margaret stood quickly, smoothing her blouse like a reflex. "Stay here." But I was already moving. I followed her to the entryway, slow and deliberate. She opened the door to find Officer Lee standing in full uniform, a clipboard in hand. "Morning," he said, nodding politely. "Just some follow-up questions on the incident. Mind if I come in?" Margaret lit up with her usual charm. "Of course, officer. Coffee? Pancakes?" I slid beside her and spoke before she could pull him away. "I think he'll want to see this first." I pulled the folder from under my blanket, the one Jake had given me, and passed it to him. Lee flipped it open, his brows furrowed as he skimmed the documents. "These are vehicle records?" "From the car I was driving," I said. "Before the accident, requested repairs. My mother's name is on them." Lee looked up. "This could change things." Margaret's smile froze. Harold, who had been quietly buttering toast in the background, dropped his knife. It clattered on the tile. Lee nodded, thanked us both, and promised to return with a formal report. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, the temperature in the kitchen dropped 10 degrees. Margaret slapped the table. Cups rattled. "Where did you get those?" I met her eyes, unblinking. "From someone who still remembers I exist." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a second, all the years of pretending slipped from her face. No grace, no motherly composure. Just a woman who'd been caught and didn't know how to claw her way back. She tried another tactic. "You think you can survive without us? You can't even walk." I rolled forward and stopped inches from her. "I don't need to walk to leave you behind." A silence fell so deep, you could hear the hum of the refrigerator motor. Then, from the far end of the room, a voice broke through. "Margaret, stop!" It was Harold. His voice was soft but clear. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. Tired, gray, maybe even sorry. Margaret turned to him, stunned, but I didn't give her time to recover. I wheeled myself back toward my room, calm, deliberate. When I reached the hallway, I pulled out the burner phone and typed quickly. "Me to Jake, she knows. They'll move soon. Be ready." Then I pulled out my notebook and flipped to the last page. Across the top, I wrote, "The Living Dead File." For the first time, it felt like I was writing my story, not reading the one they had forced on me. That thought stayed with me as I drifted into sleep. My notebook still open on my lap, ink barely dry. I must have nodded off sometime after midnight. Then I woke up coughing. Thick smoke curled beneath the door. My eyes burned before I could even sit up straight. The room glowed orange at the edges, and the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. My heart slammed against my ribs as I wheeled toward the door. As soon as I cracked it open, the hallway lit up in a flickering, hellish hue. Smoke poured in, and the scent hit me hard. Burning wood, plastic, something chemical. I heard it then, beneath the hiss and pop of fire. "Eleanor, help me!" My mother's voice. I rolled forward instinctively, but stopped near the stairs. Flames licked up from the base of the staircase, flickering out from the kitchen, the smoke twisting thickest there. That's where it started. I should have been panicking, but I wasn't. Somewhere in my gut, something else rose, cold, steady. A voice that said, "This isn't an accident." I backed away from the stairs, wheeled down the hall instead, trying to think. Then I saw movement near the back of the house, by the mudroom door. Through the haze, Margaret stood at the exit, her silhouette framed by the rising firelight. She was holding something. It took a second to register, a small metal lighter, trembling in her hand. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You weren't supposed to be here. It was meant to reset everything." Reset. That word. It dropped inside me like a lead weight. She wasn't just trying to destroy evidence. She was trying to erase me again, for good this time. "You tried to finish what you started 19 years ago," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Before she could respond, Harold stumbled into the scene, shirt soaked in sweat, face streaked with soot. He looked from me to her, dazed and horrified. "What have you done?" he yelled, grabbing her wrist. "She ruined everything," Margaret shrieked, trying to wrench away. The lighter slipped from her hand, bouncing onto the floor. Flames caught the edge of the curtain. In seconds, it went up like dry paper. "Get out!" I screamed, but the fire was moving too fast now. The heat blistered the walls. I wheeled backward, coughing hard, vision fading at the edges. My fingers scrambled for my phone. "Jake, it's happening," I rasped. "The house. I'm on my way." His voice shot back, sharp and immediate. "Stay near a window. Don't move." I pushed toward my bedroom, smoke curling over the ceiling. I forced the window open with shaking hands, cold air pouring in like mercy. The night outside was rain-slick and black. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard sirens. Inside, the kitchen radio crackled to life, its sound warping through the static. "You can't bury what's still breathing," the song crooned through the fire. I turned back one last time. Margaret was still in the kitchen, coughing, frantic, gathering papers into a bag. Even with the flames crawling toward her, she couldn't stop trying to hold on to the story, to the lie. Control was her god. And even now she was praying at its altar. The front of the house exploded in orange light. Then headlights. Tires skidded. Jake burst through the back entrance with a wet cloth over his face, dragging Harold out, coughing and gasping. Harold tried to go back in, shouting my name. Jake shoved him toward the grass. Then Jake came for me. Margaret blocked the hall, face streaked with soot and rage. "She's dead," she screamed. "Let her burn." I didn't flinch. "Then watch me live." Jake shoved past her, eyes locked on mine, and scooped me up. My lungs screamed. My legs, useless. But my heart kept pounding. We tumbled out the window together. I hit the wet grass hard, gulping air like it was gold. Jake shielded me with his jacket as the house groaned behind us, its bones surrendering to fire. Sirens screamed louder now. Blue and red lights spun across the lawn. Officer Lee's car screeched to a stop beside the ambulance. 2 paramedics sprinted toward us. Margaret was pulled from the house by force, wild-eyed and thrashing. Her voice tore through the smoke. "You don't understand. She was already gone." I sat, trembling in the grass, soaked in sweat and rain, watching the only home I'd ever known collapse into a grave of its own making. Lee knelt beside me, his tone quiet but firm. "You're safe now." I didn't believe him, not yet, because safety doesn't come from sirens. It comes from knowing you have something to return to. And right now, all I had were ashes. But I was alive. As the dawn began to rise, I saw something glint near the wreckage. Part of my old wheelchair, melted and twisted. It lay on its side, shaped almost like a halo, bent and broken. I stared at it. Even angels burn before they rise. That thought sat with me, heavy as the oxygen mask they'd strapped to my face in the ambulance. Now, 3 days later, I was waking to the faint hum of machines and the sterile stillness of a hospital room. The sunlight cut through thin curtains, casting slanted gold across the blanket draped over my legs. I blinked slowly, still disoriented, my throat raw. There was a clipboard resting on the side table. My name was on it, not the name they gave to the obituary column, not the ghost I'd been forced to carry for years. Just Eleanor Ray, bold in black ink. No quotation marks, no asterisk, no footnote. It felt real. Across the room, Jake sat by the window in a borrowed hoodie, half asleep with a styrofoam cup balanced in his palm. His head lifted as soon as he noticed I was awake. "You made it," he said, voice raspy, like he hadn't slept much either. "Barely," I replied, trying to smile. A quiet pause stretched between us before soft voices echoed from the hallway. Officer Lee appeared in the doorway, holding a manila folder under one arm. "The investigation's moving fast," he said, stepping into the room. "Your parents, the records, the forged papers, the insurance files. It's all confirmed. You'll need to testify." I met his eyes. There was no fear left in me. "I've been buried long enough. It's time to speak." He nodded and opened the folder, sliding a crisp sheet of paper onto the tray table in front of me. I stared at it, barely breathing. "Your death certificate's been formally revoked," he said, "and this is its replacement." I ran my fingers over the embossed heading, Certificate of Identity Reinstatement, today's date, my full name, and at the bottom, in neat type, status, living. I touched the word like it might vanish. My throat tightened, and for the first time in a long while, tears came. Not from fear, not from grief, but from recognition. "This is who I am," I whispered, and I meant it. Every syllable. I leaned back, absorbing the quiet beeping of the monitors and the low hum of something eternal shifting back into motion. All my life, I begged to be seen. Turns out, I only needed to stop asking. There was no parade, no applause, just a room, a name, and a second chance that didn't require permission. A nurse came in quietly, setting a cup of tea by my bedside. The smell hit me instantly, chamomile. She placed it gently within reach and gave me a kind smile before slipping out. I stared at the cup. Chapter 1 came back in a flash. The kitchen, the porcelain mug Margaret always left just an inch too far. This time, I didn't wait. I reached for it, steadily, fully. My hands wrapped around the warmth, not trembling, not asking. That was mine now. Jake shifted in his seat, watching but not speaking. There wasn't much left to say between us. Just this understanding. I'd made it through something no one could unsee. The door opened again, this time more hesitantly. Harold stepped in. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the smoke had taken more from him than just the house. His shirt still faintly smelled of soot. He didn't approach. He didn't sit. "I didn't stop her," he said softly. "I knew what she was doing, and I said nothing." Silence hung in the air, like dust after a collapse. I looked at him for a long time. The man who had once held my bike steady as I learned to ride, the man who turned away when I needed him most. I spoke without anger, just truth. "Then this silence is yours to live with, not mine." He nodded. His eyes welled up, but he didn't argue. He left the room without another word. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I turned to Jake, and he handed me a pen. "There's something else," he said. "They need your signature on the reinstatement form, for the record." The line for my signature waited at the bottom. Once, I would have hesitated, afraid it would get rejected, erased, ignored. But not now. I signed. Bold, full. Eleanor Ray. It wasn't just ink. It was resurrection. By evening, the golden light had softened into dusk. The world outside the window felt wider. I asked Jake to open it. The breeze slipped in, clean and cool. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Not in panic, but in rhythm. They sounded like release now, not a warning. "I used to think surviving meant staying," I said, eyes on the horizon. "Now I know it means leaving." Jake didn't answer. He didn't have to. From the corner of the room, the hospital radio crackled. First static, then music. "You can't bury what's still breathing." I let the tears fall this time. Quiet, without shame. That song had haunted me for weeks. Now it finally made sense. Everything. The silence, the half-truths, the eyes that looked past me for years. It all lined up like pieces in a puzzle no one wanted to finish. But this morning, as I sat in the quiet of the rehabilitation center, hands resting on the table in front of me, I realized the story wasn't just mine anymore. It had never been hers to finish either. A sealed envelope sat there between my palms. It had arrived earlier, slipped onto my breakfast tray like a casual mistake, but the red deceased stamp beside my name said otherwise. The handwriting across the front, sharp, slanted, practiced, belonged to my mother. Jake had seen it first. He'd picked it up, stared at it, and said only, "Don't." But I already knew I would. "If I don't read it," I told him, "I'll never stop hearing her voice anyway." So, after he stepped out for coffee and the nurse closed the door behind her, I broke the seal. The paper tore more easily than I expected. Inside were two things, a folded note and a photograph. The photo came first, me, around 10, smiling with my parents at the lake. My legs were scraped from a bike fall, my hair wind-blown and knotted. My father had his arm around my shoulder. Margaret stood just behind us, not touching anyone, but smiling like she'd taught herself how. I almost didn't open the letter, but I did. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means they've all turned against me. You never understood. I was trying to protect us. The system wanted to take everything. The insurance companies, the doctors, even your father. They never cared about you like I did." My throat clenched. "You were never meant to suffer. I only wanted peace. The night of the crash, I thought I was ending your pain. I didn't realize I was ending my soul." There was more, a litany of blame. The hospital, the courts, the strangers who asked too many questions. But no real apology, no confession, just justification. I read the last line 3 times before I let go of the paper. It slid off my lap and fluttered to the floor. My hands trembled, but I wasn't sure if it was from anger or heartbreak or something far colder. The final release of a weight I'd carried for 19 years. Maybe all 3. Tears came, sharp and hot. But they didn't feel like surrender. They felt like rain after a drought. For years, I'd begged her to see me as alive, but maybe she never knew how. I picked up the photograph again. That girl, 10 years old, scraped knees, hopeful eyes. I used to feel sorry for her. Now I didn't. She hadn't failed. She'd survived. And somehow she'd found her way back to the surface. The knock came mid-morning. Officer Lee, tired but kind, stepped just inside the room. He didn't glance at the envelope still sitting open. "She's been transferred," he said. "Your mother, not to prison, to a psychiatric facility outside Cleveland. They're calling it diminished capacity." I nodded. I didn't flinch. "She keeps asking to see you." I looked out the window. The leaves had started turning, gold and copper and blood red. "Tell her she already did," I said. He nodded once. That was enough. Later that evening, after the sun dipped behind the trees, I wheeled myself out onto the patio behind the center. The air was crisp, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Jake met me there, a small fire pit already glowing with gentle heat. I handed him the letter. He didn't read it. Instead, I placed it into the flames myself. The paper curled in on itself, turned black, and then drifted upward in wisps of smoke. "You can't bury what's still breathing," I whispered. And just like that, I let her go. The fire that once nearly ended me now felt like something else entirely, not destruction, but transformation. The smoke curled into the darkening sky like it had somewhere else to be. Back inside, Jake helped me finish packing. The rehab center had been temporary. Tomorrow, I was moving into my own place, a modest apartment with wide doorways and no shared history. A blank canvas. He paused beside my suitcase, hand resting on the handle. "You sure you're ready?" I didn't even hesitate. "I've been ready for 19 years. We left just before dusk. The road curved around the hills outside Columbus, trees on either side catching the last light. In the passenger seat, I let my hand rest against the glass, watching the reflection blend with the motion outside. It was the first time in years I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. At a red light, a car pulled up next to us. Windows down, music spilling out. Familiar, "You can't bury what's still breathing." The lyric caught the air like it had been waiting. I smiled, not because it haunted me, but because it didn't anymore. This time, I sang along, quietly, steady. The city faded behind us. Ahead, a small life waited. One I would build from the ground up, not salvage from someone else's wreckage. As we pulled into the driveway of my new apartment complex, I looked up at the building, then down at my hands, strong, capable. I tightened my grip on the wheels of my chair, took one breath, and pushed forward into the fading sun. They said I was gone, that I was a burden, a disgrace, a ghost in my own name. But ghosts don't rebuild. They don't heal. I did. So maybe I was never dead, just waiting to wake up. The fire, the lies, the silence, all behind me now. I wasn't the one they buried. It was their conscience. And I'm done digging it up.